So today we are lucky to be joined by Tiara De Guzman, a Chicago-based writer, coach, speaker who's invested in access, equity, and play. She also likes to read and review books over at Book Nerd Spells on Instagram, and you can learn more about her at tiara-deguzman.com. She will be sharing a little bit of her practice with journalism today. Or with journaling, not journalism. We usually talk about journalism. And we're also joined by Fiza Pirani, an independent journalist, writer and editor based in Atlanta. She's also the founder of the immigrant-centered mental health newsletter, Foreign Bodies, which I recommend y'all go sign up for. Foreign Bodies was born in 2018 from a reporting fellowship with the Carter Center. And I would be remiss not to also introduce Samantha Cabrera-Friend and Sebastián Hidalgo, the organizers of this workshop. Samantha and Sebastián are both photographers here in Chicago and are alumni of City Bureau's reporting fellowship. Together, they run a bi-weekly office hours session for alumni of our program called Study Hall. And this week's Public Newsroom is in partnership with Study Hall. We have a follow-up event next Thursday from noon to 2 Central Time. You're all invited to join. It'll be a chance for us to debrief on what we learned today a little bit more casually and in a smaller setting. So today we're going to discuss mental health, trauma, work, how they all relate. We know that journalists and community advocates often tend to be witness to trauma in their work, and we want to create a space where we can talk about that and share some strategies to help manage our mental health at work. So tonight, we're going to start by setting some community guidelines, again, just out of recognition that this topic is very personal. Then we'll transition to a Q&A with Fiza and Tiara, and then we'll do an activity. I know I just threw a lot at you guys. Are there any questions at this point? Cool. Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and, unless I'm missing anything in the chat, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and toss it to Sam and Sebas for the community agreement.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us on this Zoom call. Just very briefly, very basic things. I kind of want to go over something that's in the public agenda. You know, just be mindful of everybody. We're all here to learn. This is a safe space for everybody to learn. There are no judgments, and the topic is really broad and kind of out there. So there isn't a wrong answer or a wrong comment that you can possibly make. So please feel comfortable just speaking your mind, being reassured that this is a safe space.
Yeah. Oye guys, hi, buenas. I just want to say thanks so much for making the time to join us all here, and just reiterating what Sebas said. We are all kind of here for each other. We're here to listen. And as a reminder, this will be recorded. So if you need to step out or don't have the capacity to like kind of carry through whatever's going on right now, feel free to step out. This will be recorded and everything. So there's no leaving early or arriving late. We're all here for each other.
Which is like a rule of thumb for study hall too, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yes, no pressure.
Yeah, so I guess we can start from the very basic things. And one crucial element to just addressing mental health in the practice of any practice is really learning how to identify a lot of hard emotions or complex trauma. But I think it's important to really just start very basic for right now. And I wanted to ask the attendees and our hosts, how would you unpack mental health, the term generally, to somebody that might have a different description for it? And I guess Fiza can start.
Sure. Hey everyone, it's really nice to be here tonight. So how would I define mental health? I would say broadly it's our well-being. You know, it includes our social welfare, it includes our psychological health, it includes even the ways that physical disabilities or chronic injuries kind of intersect with our mental well-being. I always say, I come from a South Asian background where mental health wasn't really discussed much growing up, even though my parents are physicians. It was never a thing that ever came up growing up. But, as I've learned a little bit more about it, I've kind of learned that it doesn't really exist in a vacuum. There are so many variables that affect your quality of life with or without an official diagnosis. And so to me, mental health really is just your well-being that's both internal and external. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say mental health is to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like in and out. It's pretty much everything.
Pretty much. It's, I think like to have good mental health sometimes is like as simple as just making a note of how you're feeling and what's affecting it on a daily basis. And that's how I measure my mental health on, a day-to-day basis. But it's pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Tiara, do you want to respond?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here and talking about such an important topic during such an interesting time. So when I think of mental health, I really appreciated what she just said about how you grow up learning about mental health or not learning about mental health and what it is. So one of the things for me, the overall, like mental health to me overall is just like the state of your mind. It's how you respond to situations, how you're feeling on a daily basis about different events that happen in your life. And it's all about, to me, like how you process the events of your life. And depending on how well or unwell, I don't love binaries, which I'll mention, but depending on how well or unwell you feel, you process different experiences in your life in a certain way. And yeah, I think I also grew up in a house where, therapy was looked down upon. I also identify as African-American, and knowing the history in the US around medical care for Black people, there's a lot of fear around the medical system around healthcare for a lot of reasons. And so going to therapy, I think one of my favorite movies is Get Out. And so if you've ever seen it, like there is a really interesting comments about like therapy and psychology and how like Black people have not, have traditionally felt uncomfortable with that idea of letting somebody into your head, potentially your oppressors into your head. So yeah, I grew up with a very interesting idea about it just because I knew that I was supposed to fear it. I was supposed to fear like therapy and healthcare and things like that. But I wasn't fully sure why. And then in general, I think the way we talk about mental health, where sometimes you are healthy and sometimes you are unhealthy, I don't necessarily like that. I feel like there's always complexity in that. And I don't think we do a good enough job of teaching children that, especially so that as they get older, they can sort of process their experiences in a way that is meaningful for them.
I love the idea that like mental health is like continuum, it's a spectrum,
Yes.
Not really like a stagnant, once you have a diagnosis doesn't mean this is like the state of your life, like forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's, like, degree
Absolutely.
of quality of life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of like growing up without healthy tools to really address like simple things like being sad, like understanding or questioning, like, why am I feeling like this? Is that something that you all consider to be a very loose topic in terms of just like communities of color in particular? Like how can we, well, how did y'all kind of address it growing up? Or did you address it growing up? Like, when did that start for y'all?
God, I feel like I was always sad. It sounds so intense saying that, but like, I always remember being like the emo sad girl, and like, anytime I'd bring it up to my parents, at least, like a lot of the times, their like advice would be to go to mosque and pray, and all these, that's like probably the main thing. Like, I feel like I was kind of taught to connect to faith in a way that didn't come naturally to me personally. And so when I was struggling, you know, I mean, I went to mosque every day. I tried to, you know, like kind of work through that, but I had never been religious at all, just like growing up, like, you know, personally, like I had done the traditions and everything, but it wasn't something that I personally connected with. So I always felt so lost because what my parents had always depended on, faith, wasn't really working for me in a way. And so, you know, having that conversation with my parents, like I almost felt guilty talking about how sad I was, because they had kind of laid out these tools for me, you know, just like, we're here for you, like just saying that, but, you know, kind of bringing like all of us to America and giving us like a pretty good life, you know, you kind of just feel guilty, even talking about being sad, like it's a huge deal, you know, like to them, like they've been through so many ups and downs, and it's hard when you're at least a young immigrant or a child of an immigrant comparing, you know, your life to generations past, as I'm sure like young Black Americans feel too, you know, like having to kind of compare like your troubles with previous generations, you kind of feel like if they went through it, you should too. I think that survival mentality always kept me from really admitting I was sad, and, you know, embracing like the continuum of it.
Right, or just simply just expressing yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's like a term that is used in Spanish-speaking households. That's más calladito te ves más bonito, which is the quieter you are, the more beautiful you look. And I feel like those, I don't know, I guess, systemic shackles, especially being coming from a immigrant family household, can be devastating for somebody just trying to find out, you know, what it is that they're feeling inside, what it is that they're kind of observing on the outside.
I love what Tiara had said earlier about, you know, like fearing like how much you can really trust the people in the medical community. That's something that's also very common in the cities that I grew up in India, where, you know, you kind of keep your personal problems in the family and don't let it get out into the community, because you couldn't really trust a lot of the doctors. You couldn't really trust a lot of, especially when it comes to like psychology and like psychiatry, and, you know, the abuse of medicine. That was a huge thing also in India, where my parents have always been, you know, even though they are physicians themselves, they've always been kind of unsure about the field of psychology and psychiatry, because that's where their roots are too. They haven't really been able to trust, you know, people outside of the community when it comes to personal problems.
Yeah, that makes me think of that quote, Sebas, that you just said as well. It makes me think of that thing that I grew up hearing in my house, which was, what happens in this house stays in this house, does not leave this house. No one should know our business. Do not talk about it. And when we're talking about, if one of the tools of mental health is being able to express yourself, right? Not being able, feeling uncomfortable, or like you're in some ways betraying your family by talking to your friends about what's happening at home, or by, with me, it was journaling, which we'll talk about later, but my parents read my journals. My parents didn't like that I journaled. They were like, why do you have so many feelings? You're only 13. Like, where is this coming from? Yeah, so luckily I live in my own place now. My parents do not have access to my journals, but this sense of, why do you need something that's private? Like, there must be something wrong if you need to express your feelings in a place that is not your family, right? And I understand, I don't love it, but I understand the survival sort of strategy around that, right? Like making sure that certain information is not spread certain places, because like, depending on who you are, depending on where you live, like that can potentially cause problems in your family. Like I can't imagine going to a teacher and confiding and saying, yeah, my like mom did this, especially growing up with like in the predominantly white neighborhood I did, going to a white teacher and telling her, yes, this is what my mother did, and how that would like reflect on our family being one of the few families of color in the neighborhood, right?
Right, and I guess it's like there's another level to it where also, first of all, parents looking at children's journals is such a violation, and it could be, I mean, just hearing it is like, to me is almost devastating. But now that I feel like that's something that especially journalists or just information seekers or people who are frequently talking and creating anything, any art or writing a book or something like that, that's important for them to know, right? To really like look into their own personal experiences and be like, well, this happened to me and it might not be mutually exclusive, because I had like the saying in my household, más calladito te ves más bonito, is not, you know, unique to me. So
Yeah.
understanding those things is important, especially if you're getting paid to create people's stories.
Well, before you guys are even getting paid, you know, like now we're understanding your childhood, we're getting a sense of your just life and upbringing. That's my next kind of question. Or we also got a question in like understanding your guys' beautiful, really nourishing, healing practice that you have now, which I would love if you could speak a bit more to. But at what point then did you kind of understand mental health as needing to play a primary role in your practice, or not just like, oh, doing this on the side and also I'm a writer, you know, like they are fully in conversation as they should be. Was there like a point or at some point that you're like, this needs to be part of the dialogue, if not the dialogue?
For me, it was graduate school. So sort of having, just sort of being having an experience in which you are forced to work long hours for very little money while trying to like pay for everything, while trying to research. And in addition to that, being one of the few like students of color, and then having issues with faculty, and then working on a college campus also and supporting sometimes racist students, right? Like while also trying to nurture their development. It was a very, in a lot of ways, I feel that experience was like a place where I had to recognize those survival strategies. At that point, it wasn't even really thriving. It was like, how can I make sure that my mental health does not decline by being in this space that is not empowering to me. And so that's when I got into like witchy stuff. That's when I got into tarot, you know, that's like all these other practices sort of happened. But especially for me, it turned into journaling. I think sort of having that safe space where I would be in class and something would happen and I'd be like, I'm having a reaction to this. Maybe I don't feel brave enough to say anything and to have everybody look at me and be like, oh, Tiara believes this about this topic. Like, so I would have my journal next to me, as I always do. Right now, I'm taking notes. But I would have my journal next to me and sort of be like, okay, how am I feeling? Where are the like pain points in my body? Because we often don't think about how trauma and suffering, like specifically for communities of color, manifest in our bodies. And well, yeah. So we often don't think about that. So I became like very hypersensitive of my body, and I would recognize whenever I'm experiencing stress, it would show up in my chest, it would show up in my stomach. And so I would like write about that. I would make sure for the rest of the day I was eating certain foods. It really became, it really was a training ground, honestly, for a lot of this pandemic, if I'm being honest, having that space in which I was forced to, similar to my ancestors, like figure out like what survival looks like. And just hope I got to a place where I was able to thrive eventually as well.
And that's a big term, right? Or the key word there is just survival. And we're so caught up with just the need to just survive in a very basic level. And as we were talking before, how mental health is kind of internal and external, applying survival to that is huge, right? So in our last meeting that we were talking about, you mentioned something, a term that you used was racial battle fatigue. And especially now with everything that is happening, what is racial battle fatigue, and how can we address it in our everyday lives, especially now?
Yeah, so this racial battle fatigue was coined in 2003. It comes from the higher education space, which is where like my career is. And it was a study that was done on students of color. I believe it was specifically Black students. that was sort of like looking at how these Black students dealt with these compounded microaggressions and racist incidents on a predominantly white campus. And so the author sort of coined this term to talk about the pressure and the stress and anxiety that comes from having to survive in situations in which you have to code switch, which nobody talks about how awful that is, to have to switch up who you are depending on who you're around. Having to code switch in your classes to be looked at as intelligent, having to also find community with friends of color and not come off as the person who like is not woke or like, you know, like in certain spaces. So all of those different experiences that come from being a person of color, that term, the fatigue, I think is a perfect term about it. It's that, almost like a heavy burden, right, on your back. And it's like, you just have to try to survive that.
Like a battle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And I look at the word, or I try to unpack it just for myself. Battle and fatigue, racial battle fatigue. I think for me, the battling of it, especially with everything that is happening now, how do you address when you are kind of tired or when you're feeling a certain way? Like, how do you address that for yourself? And what do you do to kind of battle that, you know, complex or secondary trauma?
I have answers, but I want to hear Fizza go first, if that's okay. I'm going to write some things down. But I love that question, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, my internet just like went out just for a second, so I didn't hear the last like 10 seconds.
Yeah, the question was just the battle fatigue, just kind of unpacking that, and when do you identify that you're tired or you're dealing with a certain amount of trauma, and what do you do to kind of counter battle that?
I love that question because it reminds me of what Tiara just said about how physical or mental pain manifests physically. That's something that's very, very true for me. I have this like nerve pain on my spine, and whenever, you know, I'm not doing so great mentally, I can actually feel like my back kind of giving out. Like I feel like the nerve pain kicking in. And so I've, you know, over the past couple of years gotten really in tune with the way that my own body reacts to news, which is one of the reasons that I kind of left my full-time position at my local newsroom to kind of, you know, take control of my time and the way that I consume and work with news, because I saw that, you know, as I was so wrapped up in the news that never ends, you know, the bad news that never ends, my body was really taking hit after hit. You know, I remember like dealing with like migraines every single day. I remember like my back just like it was hard to sit up. It was hard to like just, you know, just move. And I think as soon as I started feeling that physical fatigue is when I was like, okay, like, you know, it sucks that like, you know, I couldn't identify the mental fatigue before the physical fatigue, but it did take my body kind of telling me like, hello, you know, you need to take a break. And so for me, it's definitely like I'm hyper sensitive to the ways that my body aches. And a lot of the times, you know, my mom will be like, you know, yeah, my back hurts, like whatever. But I'm like, no, like, you know, really think about why your back hurts. Like, it's not just like aging, you know, there's like so many different factors that are affecting your physical health. And for me, like, as soon as I know that, you know, I'm feeling that fatigue, I am a very big proponent of leaving technology for a while and just going outside. And that's probably the first thing that I usually do is like throw my phone like in a drawer somewhere and just kind of breathe. And yeah, that's kind of how I cope with those first signs of fatigue.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's really exciting and really important how grounded you are in acknowledging this literal mind-body connection, you know, and I think it's really interesting, and that might be the case of for a lot of people, including myself, that like you're not really addressing these mental fatigues or these mental triggers rather until something physically happens or manifests itself. So granted, everyone has their own method, but is there, for both of you guys, is there any like type of exercise or something that you recommend that gives someone the ability to check in with themselves, to like, maybe even if it's just a few questions, ability to check in with yourself to understand like, how is this affecting me? Because like you said, I feel a lot of times we don't think or check in with ourselves until it's too late, or it's manifested physically, or we're truly like strung out.
Staying quiet is really important, and that's kind of the only way that my mind kind of starts unraveling, and I can kind of start digging in, get rid of the noise a little bit. Like I said, like it really, sometimes I honestly just like find a random bench and sit outside with like a notebook, or just in the quiet, like take a walk and start letting my mind go. And yeah, I mean, I guess
you
go ahead.
Say you made that time though. That's also a step, you know.
Yeah.
Like it's not like you waited for a lull between work. You're like, you made that time. Okay.
Yeah. No, I definitely like, that's something that I have to do every day now. And unfortunately it did take, it being too late, it getting to a point where, I was like kind of like debilitated and, like on bed rest for a while. And, it took like the worst, but now it's really about prevention. And so I make a point to go on a walk for, even if it's raining, it doesn't matter. Just get outside and clear your head for a little bit.
And I think the first kind of phase to checking in with yourself in that way is really learning about the things that don't work for you. You mentioned that you leave your phone at home and you just go for a walk.
Yeah.
Just trying new things like that, right? I have a tendency of doom scrolling every time I try to go to sleep, and instead of just even replacing something that that is addicting to a certain degree, just replacing it with a book or a fiction thing, or a walk in the park, or a run or something like that, right? But I also wanted to ask you about foreign bodies and just how that was created, because there's a lot of similarities with the conversations that we're having now and the work that you do there. Can you explain what foreign bodies is?
Yeah, sure. So it actually, very much relates. The way that foreign bodies got started very much relates to everything that we're talking about. So I got this, reporting fellowship with the Carter Center. It's a fellowship for journalists who want to kind of dig a little bit deeper on mental health issues within their own community or community that they're interested in covering. So I, wanted to dig a little bit deeper into marginalized immigrant communities and the way that mental health stigma plays a role, and like the actual barriers to getting access to mental health care. So this was 2018, and I think I will say, like, since maybe 2016, 2015, I had been, like, my own mental health was definitely deteriorating. News cycle, the state of America, everything, it just kind of kept getting compounded. And while I was actually doing my reporting for this fellowship, I think I talked to like hundreds of people, every week or every month, and people from all different immigrant backgrounds, and was learning that there's just so much there to cover. And I didn't feel like enough confidence in journalism in the way that it was at that time, or even maybe that like the way it is now, that like if I were to report on the issues that these communities are facing, I don't believe that the audience would be the people I need to reach. I definitely felt like, as I was talking to all these people, like I needed a platform where it could be kind of unfiltered and, really about like by the people, for the people. And I wasn't feeling confident in the newsroom I was working at the time, or I didn't feel like I had the control over the stories, or, you know, I definitely felt like there needed to be some other space that needed to exist for these stories to be told unfiltered and in a way that felt true to the communities. And so instead of, you know, publishing a few stories in my newspaper about how immigrants in general cope with mental health or don't cope with mental health or neglect their mental health, you know, what about something that feels like a community or an ongoing kind of intimate project? And that's kind of where Foreign Bodies was built. You know, it's a newsletter, it goes directly to your inbox, and every month we kind of unpack a specific story as it relates to one immigrant and how, you know, so many factors are involved. Like, for example, we had our most recent story was about intergenerational trauma. And, you know, it was told by a South Asian woman who identifies as queer and whose partner is a trans man. And so it was like a big story about, you know, overcoming and accepting your own identity. But it was also about how, you know, historically we in the South Asian community are not really open to discussing LGBTQ communities and, you know, identity issues and sexual identity issues and gender identity issues. And so, you know, all of that, like I said, like mental well-being, like encapsulates every aspect of like how you react to different pressures in your world. And so, you know, just one story about intergenerational trauma digs into like how different communities kind of react to that. And so I really wanted to have, you know, a project that would be kind of ongoing, that wouldn't really have to fit into any box, but just kind of was able to pull in so many different personal stories and let that vulnerability speak for itself. And so, you know, it's a newsletter that's been growing and growing for the past couple of years. And it's been pretty amazing to see that, you know, change and grow. It's become kind of like a part-time little project. But yeah, I mean, it's been pretty amazing. And I think like the day that I left my full-time newsroom job, you know, I was still on the fence of like where, you know, the world would take me. And I wasn't sure if like mental health was going to be like a huge space of like my work, but I don't know how it couldn't be. It really feels like something that still needs so much addressing, and still, you know, as the world is changing, like it feels like topic of mental health is like so front and center. And I mean, I feel really lucky to be able to talk about it because, you know, while I was doing this reporting fellowship, I was also going through my own depression. I had my own suicidal ideation, and a lot of stuff going on. And I think doing this kind of work and like helping people be vulnerable and tell their personal stories in a platform like Foreign Bodies has really been healing for me. And it's really powerful to see that telling stories is healing for them too.
Yeah. There's almost like this like very beautiful collaboration that you're having with yourself and the people that you're talking to and a larger community in general. Like everything kind of almost interconnects with one another. I think that's great. Sam, did you have the question about that?
I actually wanted to hear what Tiara had to say also kind of in response, if you...
Yeah, I think the part that really interests me is it's almost like you're taking this very like, I love it, this like qualitative approach where you're not just like saying like, here is who these people are, here is what they think and feel, you know, this sort of like anthropology, just like I'm outside of the group, like observing you. I love that you're finding spaces to not only advocate for these folks, but also like stand in line and like resist with. And I think that that's really beautiful. I think, especially as we're talking about survival strategies, I think we have to be careful sometimes because it's easy to go, to just go to, I think of like that self-care slogan where so much of it is tied to capitalism now, where it's like, oh, like bath bombs and like nail salons and like, and so much of it. And just remembering that we have our own tools of resistance that we have used far longer than capitalism has existed, and that that you can sort of amplify those voices and show that is really beautiful. And it makes me think, if I'm going back to their survival strategies piece, it sort of makes me think of what you said earlier, Fizza, when you mentioned growing up and your parents sort of giving you these tools that were tied to like religion, and you were like, this is not my, this is just not me. And it's funny, I don't think that there's anything wrong with the tools that we're given. I think the assumption that we should adhere to a certain set of tools based off of our identity is the issue. Because yeah, journaling was not the accepted form of processing in my house. It was relying on family members and just like repression, maybe a little, like those were the accepted forms. And so if you don't fall into those, then you're not doing survival right, or you're not thriving right.
I also wonder if that would be like a very important tool for people to kind of recognize in their own work and in their own community is how much focus intergenerational trauma can be. There's also intergenerational strength that isn't very talked about, or tools or methods that were applied back then that could be applied now.
Yeah, and for me, I think it really does. The question earlier when you were like, how do you handle racial battle fatigue and how do you get through it? I was thinking a lot about my grandmother and how much like one of her tools of resistance that works for me, that I use because it works for me, is her ability to just claim things and say, actually, no, yep, that bill is due, but we're gonna find the money. And oh, like the world is bad right now, but we're gonna be fine. And like, you know, just like affirming that we're gonna be fine. And so affirmations work for me. And I find it really interesting, Fizza, we're sort of opposites, because quieting my mind is something I'm working on. I think there's a difference between like internal processors and external processors. I'm more the external processor type, if you can't tell. And so doing something active, journaling, dancing, writing, and getting out like my feelings, doing affirmations in the mirror, holding crystals, chanting, like, you know, I'm all about the the sort of active forms. Yeah. Although, yes, social media, also cutting that off. Sometimes the turning off can be helpful too. But yeah, sort of asking yourself, like, for the people who are trying to figure out where they should find these strategies for survival or tools for survival, I think it's first, like, look at your home, like, look at what worked and what did not work. And so then that gives you, I think, the map of where you should go when it comes to your healing process.
Yeah, I love the idea of like looking at your grandmother. Like it reminds me of like looking at my own mom, who's like she's so different from me. Like when I tell you I've been emo forever, she is like so like stoic almost, but like, you know, heart of gold, but like you don't want to mess with her. And I think like that's something that I've really grown to love. Like, you know, maybe growing up, I wanted a little bit more like physical affection or, you know, things like that. But now, like, I see the way that she holds herself and kind of think about like everything that she's been through and why she is, you know, that's like a way for her, her to show her own, I guess, resilience, even though that word I'm kind of about, but like, you know, it's like her coping mechanism is, you know, like, a mindset, like I'm the boss, so I'm the boss, like kind of like turning that on, you know, even if you're dealing with imposter syndrome all the time, it's like, no, I got this. Like, even if you don't really fake it till you make it, kind of, you know? Yeah.
Like strength is as addicting as seeing somebody angry. Like you see somebody angry, you internalize that. So seeing somebody's strength, you also internalize that, right? And it's like journaling and reflecting, which Tiara, we were talking about earlier, last week, I think. It was like there's a difference between those two things, but I feel like what we're talking about, reflecting and journaling can also benefit trying to find out what that looks like for individual people, or individual families.
I just want to also remind everyone that if you have a question, totally just type it into the response, because we are wrapping up remotely soon in this, but anything specific, let us know. But yeah, going off of that, I love thinking, of course, I mean, it's a bit of a spectrum, right? The intergenerational impacts, without saying negative or positive, just the impacts that happen. What sort of, I'm interested in when this trauma is embedded in our experience. For example, maybe it's embedded in your subculture, in what you participate in, or embedded in your domestic sphere of that example, like holiday times, people can be aware that they're going to encounter this certain thing. I feel like those are like the hardest things to encounter, those sort of things that you see coming a mile away, but you continue to experience them and you don't address them. So yeah, I'm curious if there's a way to offset. I know you can only hold like your own self accountable, and even as much as you want to help your peers in your subculture or your peers in your or friends and family, like what sort of ways are there to offset something that you see coming a mile away, or that you know that you can expect?
Like measuring something.
Yeah.
I think earlier, Samantha, you were the one who said it. You mentioned we were talking about that mind-body sort of connection. And I always, I have to add spirit there as well, right? That mind-body-spirit connection. Because the way we talk about race and also other marginalized identities and the way that they're treated and the ways that they're oppressed, the term that they're using now is like soul murder for that sort of thing. Like, it really does, like being constantly dehumanized is something that works on your own psyche. And I'm reading a book right now actually about internalized racism. It's by Bell Hooks. It's called Salvation. And it's really like, you don't realize all the ways in which you internalize a lot of the things you hear. And I see it when I look at my siblings, when we grew up, like, you know, putting towels over our hair and pretending like we had long, like straight hair. And I see it when I look at my brother and he's like 16 and like completely emotionless, and that's looked at as a cool thing to do, right? Because that's what he's been taught that's how he's been taught men act. And so you sort of see all of these these impacts. I love that you said that, these intergenerational impacts based off of whatever identities you have. And for me, that mind-body-spirit connection is about tapping into purpose and reminding yourself that you have purpose, right? Like, you deserve to be loved, you're worthy of love, and that your communities are strong and will continue to be strong. And I think tapping into joy is a really big part of that for me. Like the small things that give me joy, like bubble tea runs. I drink like bubble tea like once a week. I know how to make it. It's my favorite drink. It is a drink of joy for me. So like bubble tea runs, buying a new book, like ASMR videos on TikTok, like, you know, finding those things that just give you that like squee feeling where you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm just so happy to be alive. But then also I think like really nurturing the body. I've recently been thinking about the difference between provision and nurturance. Those two things are very different. And it's interesting especially when I think about like the patriarchy, and I think about men and how they've been taught to, like mass folks, how they've been taught they have to provide. And I'm like, provide, yes, but like, what about nurture and like nourish? And like, what about these words of like you investing in my spiritual well-being? And when I think about that, I also think about my body. Like, how do I take care of my body? I don't have to wear a ton of makeup and look a particular way, but when I do feel my back hurting or when I do feel my chest hurting from these impacts, am I recognizing that, or am I allowing myself to recognize that, or am I just moving on and saying like, get over it, Tiara, and being unkind to myself? And so finding ways to like recognizing that you're surrounded by it every day. That's why I think a self-care practice is just so important, like having those key things that you go to that give you happiness and allow you to tap into joy. Yeah, I feel like that's really important, having some sort of practice that offsets it from the get because you already have it going. Like,
yeah,
it's already there.
I think that's a really good note, like to close on. But I would love to hear, Fizza, your celebratory point or your kind of joy that you turn to.
Oh my gosh. So I think, you know, when the world kind of feels out of control, I think finding pockets of control are really important to me. Whether that's, you know, reclaiming like an hour of a day where I don't know what I'm going to do, like where I'm just, you know, I start like, you know, 60 minutes on the clock. I'm like, okay, what do I feel like doing right now? You know, it's not really pre-scheduled time, but it's, or pre-scheduled to-do lists or anything, but it's something that, you know, like I claim this hour, like nothing else is going to take this, you know, away from me. I think having that little control is really important. And I don't know if we really touched on, like I think reading is a huge part. I'm sure Tiara agrees, like of like, you know, self-care. For me personally, like reading stream of consciousness writing, reading memoir writing is essential to kind of help like my own thought process. Like for me, like I always come back to Nigerian American writer Bassi Ikpe's memoir, I'm Not Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying. And it's a memoir about her bipolar 2 disorder and anxiety disorder diagnosis and her kind of working through it. And there's, you know, she ends that book with this beautiful line about like, you know, when like life is just getting like to be too much and, you know, it just feels like so overwhelming, like allow yourself mourning. And like anytime that I have like a really, like I deal with suicidal ideation pretty often, and especially like right like during 2020, it's been, you know, pretty heavy, but I always keep coming back to allow yourself mourning. And I think like having, it's a little bit of control that I'm taking too, you know, like I'm allowing myself mourning every morning and making sure I'm like giving myself the time to come back to this and, you know, revisit how I'm feeling. And I think, yeah, like reading and controlling and reclaiming time is really important to me when it comes to getting my joy back.
Yeah, we didn't directly address it, but I just want to, like, I think you guys are already saying this, right? Like that this guilt, I feel like everything you guys listed is amazing, but also we all have this guilt that it's like, if we do those things, I'm not being productive, I'm not being busy. You guys just push through that though. That's so, thank you for leading the way and modeling that behavior, because it's not easy.
Productivity follows good emotional well-being. Like you can't do anything without, you know, a clear head.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, just really quick, we are up on time for the Q&A portion of this workshop. That does not mean we have to stop talking for the rest of the event, but it does sort of bring us to a pausing point. So really quick, I just want to say thank you, Sam, Sebas, Fiza, and Tiara, for your insights and vulnerability. And also thanks to all of the participants who are leaving like truly great comments in the chat. It has been very interesting to watch these sort of related parallel conversations happening. I also, side note, I know that there's a lot of desire for connection happening in the chat. So just want to say if anyone needs to hop off right now but wants to stay connected, feel free to leave any contact information in the agenda. That is just going to be shared with people who registered for the public newsroom. So that being said, just want to sort of explain what we're about to transition into. So we're going to do a little bit of journaling and then a little bit of reflecting as a group. So we will first walk through some prompts that Tiara has shared with us. They're journaling prompts. You'll be able to choose one if you to journal on your own for a little bit. We'll then go into smaller groups to sort of reflect on that process, and then finally come back and share out how that went, what you discussed in your small groups, and if there are any questions that are still lingering for you from this Q&A, you'll have a chance to sort of ask those then. So that being said, I'm going to share my screen really quickly so that you all have a chance to read these prompts as Tiara has written them. They are also in the agenda that we shared with you all earlier if you want to scroll down to the section that reads activity. So let me share my screen. It's gonna take just a second, guys. Okay, great. All right, so Tiara, did you just want to go through these prompts and sort of share with folks what these prompts are and what maybe they should think about while they have some time to journal?
Absolutely, sure. So these are a few prompts that I have either made or like extended in some way from awesome people that I've found them from. And so this first one is called the Octavia prompt. I call it the Octavia because it is after Octavia Butler, who is this like, I don't want to curse, amazing, who is this amazing science fiction, Black, just like affirming, wonderful writer. And so this is actually, Octavia Butler died, but this is a piece of her journal writing, and it's being kept in a library. I would love to go see it at some point. But in it, she writes like, I shall be a best-selling writer. Each of my books will be on the bestseller list, so be it, see to it. And she writes all of these like wonderful things about what she would like to manifest in her life. This is one that I used throughout grad school. And if you would like a piece of my journal, it is over on the side where I say, I will graduate in May. I will find a job by graduation, and I will not be shocked when I'm offered a great salary because I know my worth. And all of those things happened, which is great. But that's what I was journaling when I was in class or whenever I was dealing with something hard. I was like, my apartment in this city I live in is so gorgeous. I'm so happy. And so sort of affirming that for myself. That is like the first prompt that has to do with manifesting and speaking in the present tense about things that you want for yourself. The second one comes from Brene Brown, actually, who is also like a really good, I have mixed feelings about her, but I really do, like I've read all her books and I do find her brilliant. And so she has this exercise called the permission slip. And basically what this is from is she was about to meet Oprah for the first time. And so naturally she was freaking out. And she was like, she wrote herself a permission slip and kept it in her pocket all day where she said, you have permission to be excited to meet Oprah. You have permission to be a nerd, like, and just be so excited that you're meeting her, and be nervous, but be brave and like do it anyway. And so this is something I also used a lot, where either I will have my friends write me permission letters and permission slips. Have good friends, y'all, who will deal with your weirdness. Or I will write myself a letter in my journal. I think what you said, Fizza, with allow yourself mourning, that has been a big thing for me in this activity. So if I've needed to like let things go, Tiara, I allow you to let things go. I allow you to grieve this experience and things like that. So yes, that's the second one, the permission letter. The third one is one I started doing once again in grad school. And so these are brave lists. So what I would do is I would keep a journal, but I would keep a brave list at the back of the journal that I would return to every day. And I would list all the ways I was brave or courageous in a single day. So that included things like speaking up in class when I was feeling imposter syndrome and like, why did I do that? It would include big things like doing this presentation. It could also be small things like I'm proud of myself for cleaning my room and getting out of bed and when I was really like depressed and sort of sad and feeling unproductive. And so these are ways of affirming even the small things that you do that take bravery or courage. And this next one is called the Why I Stay or Why I Keep Going. And so this comes from a poem, or this idea sort of came from a poem by George Ellen Lyon that is called Where I'm From, where he sort of talks about where he grew up and the different experiences that he had there. And so I sort of changed it to Why I Stay or Why I Keep Going. So I work as a career coach, and I know that people don't always love their jobs. And so having a poem that I could return to, especially when I was in grad school and sort of asking myself why I was staying in grad school and why I needed my degree, sort of writing affirmations about why I was staying, whether it was the money or community or security or understanding my worth. So listing those things, or even saying why I leave, is a good way to also flip this activity, why I left, if you need to like let go of something. And then the next one, this one is like journaling 101. Research does show that like gratitude journaling is just the best, most productive type of journaling that you can do. Writing down things that you are grateful for every single day, big and small, whether that's, it was a sunny day, I really loved petting my dog for 20 minutes, or I just had a really good journaling session and I'm feeling very grateful. So writing down whatever sort of makes you feel good about yourself and about your day. And on the side, some of the things that gratitude helps with: better sleep, stress relief, reduced anxiety and depression. Sort of being in a space where you can tap into gratitude is really important every day. This can also be something you keep at the back of your journal also. Okay. And so this is another one. So sometimes journaling, sometimes you need to be a little mean. And that's, I think it's okay, because you're in your own space and no one's gonna see it. You're not gonna send it to anyone unless you decide to, good on you. But I call this like the battle poem, AKA the productive petty. What you do is, if you are going through something that's really tough, or you are dealing with someone who is draining your energy. Some of you I saw wrote like things about still living at home, or maybe some stress at home. This is a great place to sort of take out that stress. It's okay to be a little bit petty. I've written a few about J.K. Rowling recently. Just any types of poems that where you sort of write about what you're declaring war on, right? Like that's the whole point of the battle poem. Like you're declaring war on something. So in this example, it's like, dear racism, I'm not dealing with your ish today. Like I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just gonna live my life and thrive and be Black girl magic all day, right? And so allowing yourself to be angry, right? In a place where you're often like asked not to be angry is really important. So giving yourself that space, I think, is good. One more thing with this, I would say not to use this poem or this activity all the time, because it does show that like research shows that like journaling can actually have an adverse reaction with your mental health if you write constantly about negative experiences or traumatic experiences. So I wouldn't use it all the time, but sometimes you just need to let it out. And this poem, this activity is for that. Yes.
Yeah, I just left this in. I wasn't sure if you wanted to share any of this, Tiara, but
yeah. I can just briefly. So the first thing, this is just like journaling advice in general. Practice grace throughout the process. Journaling should not be one more thing that you do wrong today, right? Like it shouldn't be something that you put a lot of pressure on yourself to do. If you don't end up finishing a journaling entry, or if you don't journal for a few weeks, no one's gonna tell. Like your journal doesn't care. It's still like that space that is there for you. And find some journaling role models and do research, similar to how I showed you the Octavia Butler thing. Reading memoirs and reading other people's journals can be a really empowering practice. Find the medium that works best for you. So journaling is great, but I think any reflective activity, whether that's talking to a friend, doing vlogs, keeping an audio like file where you like talk to yourself about things. I see like friends making like iPhone note poems, things like that. It doesn't have to be an actual journal. However you process things is okay. And then, yes, just lastly, remembering journaling can be a really radical healing tool that you can use for yourself, because we all deserve a safe space in this world, and hopefully your journal can be that place. Oh my gosh, The Artist's Way is a wonderful book. People are saying some good books. Writing Down the Bones is also great. Okay, anyways.
Thank you for that overview. No, yes. And just to folks that are recommending books or any other resources in the chat, also feel free to leave those in the agenda. Honestly, when in doubt, write in the agenda. Except for actually, I'm about to give instructions to contradict that, so don't listen to me. What I was going to say is, we'll give you all 7 minutes to respond to one of these prompts. And for the sake of that, I do recommend that you have your own document or notes app or journal or whatever works for you. Yeah, and again, I'm not sure if I said this up top, but make sure you choose one of the prompts that you think you'll feel comfortable talking about once we go into small group discussions. And thanks again, Tiara, for sharing those with us and breaking them down. Super helpful.